So here you can see my screen. Here's the dashboard, everybody, which is what we obviously just launched to start showcasing tokens based on the framework. We're going to be adding new tokens basically on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We do like to try and check in with the issuer of the token, if possible, to ensure that, or the protocols that these tokens may control or not control, to double check everything. But let's jump into some of them. So, I mean, obviously, when you come on the dashboard, this is where you're going to find the tokens. Our hope is to have, very shortly, either a rating or ranking, but we want to be very careful about that, of course, and be less subjective. We also will have more information, more easy to see, but like this is for investors right now and for regulators, whomever might want to look in deeply at a specific token, right? So let's take a look. Let's jump into Lido, for example, here. So there are sort of 4 things that we're looking at. And then a 5th, which is off-chain dependencies, which is a little bit different and gets a little bit more confusing from a legal and regulatory perspective, right? A lot of a balancing act. So the first is obviously on-chain control. And here you can see, and jump in, Jordan, at any point, but here you can start to see what this token actually controls on-chain, whether that's certain components of the actual protocol itself. In Uniswap's case, that could be different versions of the protocol. But yeah, actually, Jordan, why don't you talk a little bit specifically about on-chain control?
So on-chain, as you can see, on-chain control, to some degree, it's rather a broad thing. It's sort of like what we're talking about, but it's sort of like one half of the coin in the sense that it's what can we validate that token holders have direct and, as I said, inalienable, like they are the final authority. I think that's really the way you should think about this. Is there's a couple of different like sub categories in here. It's, as I said before, like, does a governance workflow exist with token holders sort of as the root controller of it, or are they sort of like directly able to influence parameters? A lot less common, but like it definitely exists. Again, are all the roles in the role changing system accountable to token holders? So like in Aragon, everything is run through a centralized permission manager, which is controlled by token holders. So I say centralized, like it's a singleton contract, not a single entity. So if you give token holders the vote over the permission manager, you're able to control all roles in the system. Upgrades we spoke about, we separate that between the protocol itself and the token. Like obviously you can have a protocol that's upgradable, you can have a token that's upgradable, those things need to be treated separately. And then there are some sort of other things in there as well, such as is the supply schedule for tokens under token holders' control? Because that becomes sort of like an attack vector as well. If I can suddenly inflate you to a minuscule voting power, well, how much control do you really have? So those are sort of the things in there.
Yeah, and this isn't just about decentralization versus centralization. This is more focused on the fact that the token holders themselves have control over this, as you can see here, and that's to potentially defend themselves, defend the product that creates value for the token, which comes down to the next part, which is value accrual, which is super crucial. To some degree, there are projects, of course, many who, not many, but some who have given away this control to token holders. But then are they actually driving value back to the token in some capacity, whether that's through an automated buyback mechanism, whether that's through a VE gauge system, which has become, was implemented by Curve originally on Aragon and has grown since. And here you can see in Lido's case, obviously, like, as we know, Lido is a real DAO, as they like to say. Look how much control token holders have here over everything. And they do have control over actually value accrual, but it's not active right now. And if you go obviously into the forum, you'll see that they've actually put up a proposal for that. So this might be turning green soon, right? Do they have control over the treasury, the mechanisms for value accrual? And one thing that's a bit different is there off-chain value accrual as well? And we haven't verified that for Lido, of course, but that could be like a UI or front end, could be services, it could be something else as well. Then we head down to verifiability, which is very important. And we actually define these here. As you can see, you can sort of open them up to see how important they are. And this measures whether a token's material code is independently verifiable, which is super important. We've obviously done the work for you here by verifying it for you. But like, is that verifiable? Is it credibly neutral, which is really important. And the interesting thing is although this was designed really for token holders and investors, this matches almost one-to-one with the market structure that's being put out in the US right now, which is super important. And then finally, okay, great. So now like you've come in here, you've looked at some of these projects, you realize that they have actually given away control and ownership to token holders. They might have value accrual already in place and active. Like these are all great signs, right? But then you really want to know as well, we've come to realize if there are misaligned incentives. It became quite popular a few years ago to have a dual equity token model in our industry, where the labs team was launching a token through a foundation, and then they had their own equity in the company. The problem with this, of course, is that you have misaligned incentives. Eventually, as this goes on longer and longer, maybe there's less tokens within the actual labs team themselves, for example. So then the incentive is no longer for them to drive value to the token, it is to drive value to their equity. No matter how good of people they are, show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome, I think is the saying. So in Lido's case here, obviously they have quite a complex legal setup, but there's no equity. There is a foundation, and there are some boards as well that control. These boards set up control certain things such as the UI, such as some certain amounts of money that need to be used for certain things. So we have looked at this and deemed, okay, there's a pretty strong incentive alignment with Lido, or at least there aren't misaligned incentives, let's say, that would potentially decrease the potential value of a token for token holders. So that's great. Like as a project goes, this is great, and no surprise when it comes to Lido.
Just add one thing. There's a category there on sort of like token holder concentration. We had a bit of a debate on whether to include that, because in order to get this out, there has been some analysis by people like Arkham on concentration of holdings. The basic idea is that it is entirely possible, even though that you can have within some cabal of insiders would have over 51% of supply, and in many cases that means that they de facto control everything. That is quite hard to verify, but we thought it would be remiss to not have a framework that didn't at least allow for that. But you'll notice in these that as of this right now, we haven't yet verified that. Now we can ask teams and we can get a bit of color on this, but for the time being, it's just something to bear in mind when you're thinking about this analysis of do you have some, are you confident that there is this wider distribution? As I said, it can be quite tricky because people can have multiple wallets. There can be sort of future vesting schedules to take into account, and people can deliberately obfuscate this. And obviously that can change very quickly. But I think it's just something to bear in mind. It's something that we hope to add in the future as well, potentially via a partner.
Yeah, exactly. And we're in pretty close touch with Blockworks, for example, who have their own framework and dashboard, which is not as focused on the ownership and incentive alignment components and on other components. And this is where we plan to consider working with them to ensure that everybody here watching has sort of all the information they need to make good decisions. So yeah, coming into Aave, let's take a quick look. Obviously, we know, amazing on-chain control over everything. Value accrual is turned on. Everything is extremely verifiable. Obviously, we have not, gone through the token distribution yet, but knowing, somebody like Aave, it's probably quite distributed compared to the average project because of their age. And then obviously here's a difference from Lido, where there's some off-chain dependencies, which everybody has known recently, which you can get the information of who owns the trademark, who owns the distribution, the primary interface. It's, it's not necessarily likely, but it's possible in these kinds of instances where, you could switch the underlying protocol to a new UI or an existing UI, that has tons of distribution. You eventually get to a state where potentially the UI is the main form of distribution. So these are the types of misaligned incentives that we want to look out for. I know the Aave, labs team and all the contributors at Aave are incredible, and it's one of the best projects ever. And they are rectifying some of these things, having open conversations. And as those conversations move through, we hope to update this dashboard or even get nice, DMs from them wanting to update it. And you can see here we have this last update. And then there's this submit token section where actually you can sort of provide more requests. So you could even ask, for us to potentially update something. This is how it started. Looking forward to launching a few more tokens in the next few weeks. Obviously, this isn't something that's done super quickly, simply because we're actually going to into great detail and at great length to show you truly what's happening with these big purchasing decisions that you or any liquid fund might be making. So it's super important we get it right.